This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in edtech, spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver effective, customized, and engaging learning experiences for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hello, everyone. My name's Ladek, and my guest for this episode is Bianca Raby, a passionate learning designer, serial entrepreneur, and digital educational strategist. As the CEO of Oppida, a global digital education agency, Bianca works to raise the bar of online learning daily and believes this in-demand emerging profession will help solve the educational challenges of today and the future. Bianca also debuted as a writer in 2021 with her book, Online Learning, So You Want to Be a Learning Designer, which she wrote to inspire educators to become expert learning designers. In this highly designed conversation, Bianca and I talk about how she stumbled into learning design herself and how it transformed how she views learning. We also discuss why we still divide adult learning into the two major houses of higher ed and corporate L&D. We then move on to if you are in a traditional educational space and feel like you don't currently have adequate time or resources to truly consider learning design. Bianca breaks down why this skill is an absolute must for educators today and something that you really need to prioritize. Then Bianca provides us with useful stories about successes and challenges using tools like artificial intelligence to create efficiencies in learning design. We then go further to discuss how artificial intelligence is poised to save educators time in a big, big way, and what opportunities exist in order to use this reclaimed space and this reclaimed time in your career. Then Bianca provides her views about how AI can help with assessing progress, growth, and competency. And then, as we always do, Bianca, we end our conversation with Bianca telling us about how will AI change things in the short term, and then what tools Bianca recommends for educators to obtain major results today. And remember, we record this podcast live so that we can interact with you, our listeners, in real time. So if you'd like to join the fun every week on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube, just come over to elearnmagazine.com and subscribe. I now give you Bianca Raby. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the eLearn podcast. My name is Ladek, as you just heard. And let's see, I always forget. It's this finger right here. There we go. I'm coming from OpenLMS. If you're listening to this live or if you're going to watch the recording or whatever it is, come over and check out the AI and Learning Summit that's going to be happening with OpenLMS. We know that this is a super exciting and hot and, broad-based topic that everybody's excited about. How is AI going to impact learning, which is, quite honestly, what we're here to talk with Bianca Raby about today. Hello, Bianca. How are you?
Good. Thanks, Ladek. Hi. Thanks for having me.
No, my pleasure. You are the CEO of Oppida.
Oh,
Did I get it right? As soon as you say it the wrong way, I can't it.
Okay,
but as I do that, well, first of all, where are you sitting? We're on different parts of the planet, right?
We are on very different parts of the planet. I'm sitting here from Bali, Indonesia. It's 6 a.m. for me, and it's the end of the day for you. So I haven't even had my first coffee. So already putting that disclaimer out there, guys. I'm on the coconut water. So
nice, that's fantastic. And I'm in Mexico City, so we're in the age of AI, but still, maybe I'm just old, but I just love the fact that we can have this conversation live and in real time. It's actually fantastic. Why don't you, as I always do, why don't you take the first, 30, 60 seconds here to just sort of give us, who are you and what is Oppida?
Well, so I guess I would describe myself these days as a serial entrepreneur, but educator and learning designer. So I've been in education for coming up 20 years. I started as a classroom teacher, and then I moved into educational technology, into business, did my MBA, and ended up starting my own company called Oppida. And basically, Oppida stands for the idea of raising the bar in quality education online, predominantly. Doesn't mean we don't love face-to-face. We just really specialize in online education, and we raise the bar of that through the focus on the idea of learning design, which is, I guess, teaching in the future. So learning design is the act of creating experiences, as you would know, online. And that is a really, really important part and a big step that we have found over the last 10, 15 years. It's been sort of somewhat overlooked in some of the higher education institutions, that actual act of designing an experience for that learner in that particular platform. So Oppida just basically spends all of our time talking to people about how to create better online learning experiences, get better results. And because I'm an ex-teacher, I talk to teachers a lot about how to upskill in digital education and how to ride the waves of the big transformation that we're seeing across the sector. So that's a very, hopefully that was 30 seconds.
I have no timer. But one thing that you didn't mention is that you also wrote a book called Online Learning. So it's called Online Learning. So you want to be a learning designer, kickstart your career transition to a learning designer now. Before we dive down the AI path, how did you stumble into learning design as this is the skill, the thing, the mindset, however you want to characterize it, that's going to be transformational apart from the tool sets that you have out there?
So basically I was working in schools. I came out, I started working in higher education. And so I landed myself a job at an online business school. And I was there to revamp and to restructure and to do some curriculum design, et cetera, right? Coming out of business, but also having strong education curriculum background. And basically I stood there and I realized that most of the people involved in the actual designing of the subjects online, right? Because this business school was ahead of its game. It was already just an online business school. It was doing partnership models with universities that were very clever. But the people in charge of actually designing the courses and the subjects and the content into the LMS had zero educational background.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? So
great business model, but then the delivery.
Fantastic business model. But I came in and went, oh my Buddha. Yeah. No. That's not a course, right? Like that's not how these students are going to engage with this. So we've got to do something different if we're online. We're not going to annotated PowerPoint decks do not teach online very well. They have their own place in certain areas and they can be useful at some points, but they should not be the foundation of an entire subject, right? Because we were doing undergrad and postgrad. We were doing an MBA online, right? So we had to find a way, and I'm going, where's the conversation about personas and learners and where they're sitting and how they're using it, and all these things that came naturally as a teacher, right? These are all things, learner-centered design is not something you have to tell a K-12 teacher about. They already do that by default because, of course, it's learner-centered because that's who they're delivering to, right? So we were in this space in higher education when I started that job where people were starting to think about design thinking as a way to help people understand how to design for online. We were starting to have conversations about learner-centered design, right? And so I'm going, yeah, cool. And then realized that kind of by just natural my background and where I landed and how I was in my position, I was playing the role of a learning designer or an instructional designer. So we'd already been hearing the term ID, instructional design. It had been used mostly in corporate, though, at that point. Like it was more for people who knew how to use the tools. It wasn't so much the term that was being used to encapsulate the entire learner experience, which an educator from a very strong education background would be able to provide.
Hi there. I'm sorry to break into the show right now, but if you're enjoying this show, if you are challenged, if you're inspired, if you're learning something, if you think that you're going to be able to get something out of this to put into your practice, do me a quick favor. Pause right now and just hit subscribe on your podcast player right now. It doesn't matter which one, just hit subscribe because that way it'll make sure that you never miss an episode in the future. Thanks. Now back to the show.
And so I started.
Pause right there for a minute because I think that you just touched on something that nobody has really talked about yet. And I think is something of an elephant in the room is that we still divide, adult corporate learning from all other, and we even use different words, right? Like that's the education space and this is the learning and development. I'm like, what is that all about? Like, we don't like turn into different humans, once we become a certain age or get a certain, certificate or something. So would you characterize that as, I mean, elementary school teachers should be doing or following the same principles as maybe different for different audiences, but all of those same principles need to be around, right?
Exactly. And that's been my argument actually for a while now, is that it doesn't matter who you are. There are some principles in learning that we all need to understand, regardless of whether they're teaching face-to-face or digital, right? And the art of a learning designer, in my opinion, is someone who can take all of the parameters that they're provided and the students. So the technology is a parameter, the budget of the client is a parameter, the way that it's going to be delivered, the time frame it's got to be delivered in, the volume of learning, et cetera, plus also the fundamental principles of learning that we know we all abide by. I mean, I'm no different. I mean, I'm sure you and I have very similar ways that things will land in us, and sometimes they will not. And there'll be some things that will be really, really wrong for most people and, right for others. So if we take all of that together, that's what I call a learning designer, because they are in the moment drawing on every single part of their knowledge and background and theory and practice in trying to convey something complex simply and take someone from A to B to C, then to Z. And they are doing all of that with technology as the main center point, right? And so I've gotten a bit of controversy at times when I've tried to say there is a difference between an instructional designer and a learning designer. And I call it out by saying instruction is top down. It's, I have this information and you need to receive it, and I need to know you've received it and ticked it off. Very much it can be. That is not to say that instructional designers that call themselves instructional designers are not doing learning design. Right. But when I see the term, I think of instruction being very top down. So it's very much for compliance. Like, okay, you started doing your job. I need you to understand where all the power plugs, where all of the, where the evacuation point is, where the da-da-da-da is. So I need you to go through this little course which says, do you understand where your evacuation point is? Yes. Do you even know, have you done it? Like, it's very compliancy and can be quite, right? But what we talk about in learning design and learning experience design, which is the other term people have sort of thrown into it. So you'll also hear people say LXD, learning design. I just stuck with learning design because I think everything's an experience. But what you'll see in that space is that the role expands, and it really expands to a lot more into even the learner experiences they enter the course is important, right? So they get handed off from the marketing team. The marketing team get the person enrolled. What is the first interaction they have with you? How do they access the system? When they land on the homepage of the LMS, what do they see? How are they interacted with? Who's there to greet them? Is there actually a person on camera saying, hi, this has been developed by a human being? And I'm like, this is coming into our topic actually. But I'm here and I'm like here to support you, even though this is maybe a self-paced learning experience. But hey, you can access support by X, Y, and Z. How are they, how are we making sure that they get through the course? Because we know retention in online courses is terrible. Yes. So how do we make sure that we get them through the course?
And completion is too, right?
Completion retention is a disaster, right? I'm sure you, me, we've all got online courses that are open and we haven't finished them. Mm-hmm. So it's our job as learning designers to do as much as we can in the design process to make sure that you have the best chance of finishing. So yeah, and so the reason I wrote a book about it is because if you see the market and what is coming down in demand for digital education, we are like nowhere near even like saturation. I mean, we're nowhere near. Like even in 2019, before the world went mad, in 2019, we were still only spending 3% of our entire global education budget on digital education. 3%, right? I don't know what it is today. I haven't figured out where that stat moved to, but I'd imagine it's not, 20. So we're still not even kind of where there's going to be so much more demand, right? Because of this need to upskill. And so I'm saying to the market, already there's a shortage of really qualified learning designers. There's a lot of people who can say, hey, I can use one of those tech systems and I can publish some stuff. Yeah. But I'm talking about people who can do that really intense work of all those trade-offs I just spoke about, and then still bringing something to life for a learner through a screen and possibly with diminishing budgets, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
My question for you then is, it's the why behind that, right?
mm-hmm.
And so if I'm in a more traditional education space, I don't have the resources, I don't have the time, I can see that happening. If I'm in an L&D space, it's efficiencies again, budgets come into play, right? It's more about, can we pump out this knowledge, pump out these courses and upskilling and whatnot, because we're trying to keep up with the pace of whatever, rather than saying, what if we took a step back and really rethought it? And then people just like, I've literally watched so many educators when I say, hey, what if you take a step? And they're like, oh, it's like, are you kidding me? Like that, when would I ever do that? Like, what's your why for the reason why learning design isn't an absolute must for everybody who's delivering today?
It is all of those things. I've had almost clients in tears on the phone because in the discovery call with me, because of the remits that their superiors have put on them about delivering something within an impossible deadline with no resources. There's a very big disconnect between most of the time in higher education, I'm talking more because that's where I mostly spend my time now, in sort of adult education, higher education, vocational, is there's a disconnect between who makes the budgetary decisions and who's got the power to decide what goes when and what's coming out, their pressures that they're under from their boards or et cetera, and the people on the ground doing the work. So that's why there's a skills shortage, because we haven't kept up with upskilling our staff and our teams and our educational team administrators to understand how to do it. So that's why I wrote the book. That's also why I built out my micro-credentials in learning design, to help people to kind of quickly upskill if they need to. If they're inside an organization where boss says, you've got to put up this 2-day workshop that was live, I want you to put it up in 3 months onto the system. At least they have somewhere to start, because a lot of the time they haven't been given any training. They don't understand the technology. They don't understand the trade-offs they're making. They'll just go to the nearest tech that pops up that a friend says is cool. They'll use that. They won't know what they're trading off of an experience of, et cetera, because the whole space has been fairly, underskilled in the digital area. So the why is, there's a disconnect. The other why is, everybody thinks everything has to be done yesterday. And there's a pressure for everybody to have raced out into the market, and especially those who were really putting the blinders on before 2020 and were saying, no, it's not possible that we could ever do what we do online. Never. Those organizations that are completely shut down to any type of digital engagement are very much the worst off right now, because their learning curve was so steep and so deep that they're still in recovery right now from trying to move too quick without the people internally that understood what they were doing. Look at our schools, for example. I don't know, in Australia, it was overnight, everybody's teaching through online, which just meant teachers were jumping on Zoom and trying to deliver exactly the same as they would in a classroom on this screen, which is an absolute disaster. So that's just one tiny example of how most organizations had to move so fast that the change wasn't managed and the people weren't ready, and there wasn't an understanding of the implications of that kind of change. So
right.
That really answering the question why there is, that's just a couple of the big reasons.
It's just it's multi-layered and it's I guess. So take us to where have you seen, I'm kind of moving us towards this, how are we teaching in the age of AI? Because in my mind, AI is just an efficiency tool, right? At this stage right now, it creates massive efficiencies because it doesn't get it's not, if we think about it, right? Here's another great thing, and I cannot remember where I got this, but this is a decade ago I read this about the reason why AI brings this efficiencies, because it just doesn't have all the human hangups, right? Like I ask you a question, or if I'm going to ask, my son to write a paper for school or whatever like that, God, just even the emotional stuff that you got to go through to get started on the paper, Peter doesn't have that, right? Just like the thought process, trying to second guess, oh, will they like this or not? All of that stuff goes away, and it's an instant response, right? So that's the efficiency part of it. Where am I going with this question? I know that I had a question in here somewhere.
I know you're getting there.
Apologize. But so ultimately, if where we need to be is creating these experiences, right? We need to be designing learning that, as you said, takes a learner from A to Z, and it's not just instruction. It's not just we need. How do we start doing that? How do we start peeling back that? And my question was, what are the success stories that you've seen? Like, can you give me one or two examples where it's like, look, they didn't think they could do it, but wow, you came in or somebody stepped in and here's a great outcome.
Well, okay. I think so you've touched on two things here. So there's it's a machine. It doesn't have feelings. It doesn't have empathy. It's not going to replace humans because it can't, because it's not a human, right? Never going to be. It's only analytical. It's only scraping data. It cannot differentiate between good data and bad data. It is going to just scrape whatever it's going to scrape. It's going to throw whatever is up into your face. And it's the human that does the discernment and brings in the heart. So if you think of it as in mind and heart, right? The AI is the mind. The human is the heart. Now, we all know that if we run around the world just using one of these, right, we find ourselves very unbalanced and in trouble, right?
Yeah, so, I couldn't have said that better. That was right? Really nice, yeah.
So we all know that we want mind and heart and body congruence, right? So this is the same with technology. This is the same with where we're going. I see it as just this big balancing act that we need to take. So I think an answer to your question is that what is a really good experience? Are you saying what is a good experience using AI, or what have I seen people being able to progress using digital tools?
Even before we go there, just that whole like taking the step from I'm going to just get on Zoom and try to deliver to kids, or I'm just going to put my PowerPoint online as a professor or whatever.
Yeah.
That first question is the aha moment when somebody's like, okay, look, I'm actually going to step back and do this the right way. Like, what are those success stories? Like, what? And
they're amazing. When they happen, they're amazing. And I actually I was fortunate to be able to, by coincidence, I got back on the tool. So as a CEO, sometimes you don't get onto the projects, right? Because obviously you've got CEO things to do. So last year we won a piece of work with a really interesting team over in Geneva, and they were so sweet. They were like, we know nothing, but we need to do this, right? They were the best type of students, as you would say, right? They came into every call and they were like sponges. They were like, we've been told we have to put our face-to-face thing. They had this beautiful, program that they've been running face-to-face for years, but they got a grant to try and put it online. And so we came in, and I mean, we would have 1.5 hour calls once a week. And it was like I was in a classroom teaching them. They were amazing. They were like asking questions, listening to trade-offs. And then you could see the light bulbs going off. And then they'd go off for the week and do their bits. And we had very tight project management, so that because it was a really tight deadline, of course, because everything had to be done yesterday, because this is the world we live in. But they worked, and they worked so hard, and you could see it on their face. And by the time we got to the end, they went, oh, now we see how complex this is. And we're so glad we went out to a supplier, right? They just had this relief because they saw how much work they still had to do, even though we were holding it up, right? They saw the amount of thinking involved. They saw the amount of trade-offs they had to make. They saw the act of doing it made them edit, consolidate, get concise, get clear. It actually brought so much more to their team because they all had to get on the same page about what was really important, right? Because when you're in the online space, you don't get to just wing it. You're making fixed assets. So you're making a decision that this is critical information for the student. If you put 20 pages of critical information, it's not critical information. So our job is to force them to consolidate, to get better, to get concise. And that entire exercise is absolutely brilliant for a team who are working on a common goal and teaching a common, something, collectively as the organization was standing for, right? So when I see that, I go, this is why we exist. This was the whole reason that I started the company, because I knew there was a big misunderstanding. And until you've gone through that process of creative process of trying to build an online course, even for me, who's been doing this for writing courses and learning for 20 years, when I sit down to still write a course, I go through all the pains of a creative as well. So I start and then I go, oh crap, I hate that. And I throw it out. And then I walk away for 2 days and then I come back and I rework something. And then I read something I wrote last week and I go, that was crap, get rid of that. And so it's the same process as a creative goes through. Whereas when we just teach face to face, right? The difference is, and for most teachers, they get really good very quickly at winging it, right? We're very good on the fly. It's part of our natural. I don't know. Maybe they somehow subliminally teach everybody at university how to be really good on the fly. But you go in with a guideline, right? So you remember, you wake up and it's Monday morning. You've got to teach math, science, drama, but whatever. Right? You've got a bit of a plan. You've got some worksheets. You've got some tools in your belt, and you're like, yeah. You just go in. And you naturally just kind of wing it. This is where it's so different in learning design, because there is no winging it. You're actually you're publishing a book somewhat that's agile. You're publishing a book that can be edited, right? So you have to go through the process. Like somebody's like, okay, well, on Monday morning, which would be module 1 to the student, what are they going to see on module 1? What do they need here to build to the next one? And you have to check yourself on everything you put in there, because it's like, well, once it's in there, it's got to be relevant, because the student will just not read it.
Right.
Like once it's in that video script, if that is a piece of useless information in that video, then that video is a waste of money.
And I've only seen that happen like a million times. I've got 3 kids, just saying it. And I'm not only through the pandemic, but just even, in today, it's amazing how dismissive that generation, at least my son, who's a teenager, he's just dismissive. He's like, this isn't relevant. And he's willing to just walk away. Whereas maybe me or my wife, or maybe I'm not sure you, but like I would kind of plow through some things, back in the day, because it was in a book. You know what I mean? Because it was
no tolerance. No tolerance.
Yeah. So
and that also goes to the whole, like, who's delivering it. Like if you get someone to deliver it and they go, hi, welcome to module 2. We're here to talk about.
Don't get me started on delivery. Woo.
Right? If you get someone who is like, not their fault, they've got a superpower in this world and it might not be on camera. But if you get someone who does not know how to speak to people in camera and cannot bring warmth into the screen and doesn't know how to deliver to that medium and hasn't thought through what they're saying, which I've seen all the time, right? Then those kids aren't going to watch it. Nah. They'd rather go on, YouTube's got way more exciting things to watch.
Amen. So we don't go down that rabbit hole. I'm going to take us there. So
sure.
Let's go back to the example in Genève, which love those people over in Switzerland. But when we were kind of teeing up and designing this conversation for the podcast, the question that you asked that I'd love the most was, how is AI really going to save you time? And then what will you do with that time? Right. And so maybe we can use that example, or if you want to use a different one where it's like, had they had the power of ChatGPT or whatever, some of these other tools out there, how would we answer the question for them?
Okay. Well, I think I'll start by saying, as educators, we've been promised our entire lives to be saved time. Now, I'd imagine if we'd asked all the educators right now, are they really busy and they have a to-do list coming out their eyeballs, they'd all say yes, right? So let's just already say society is not very good at saving time and using it for nice things. We save time and make room for more stuff to do, right? We don't actually save time it's not like anyone's saving time to sit by the pool and have a cocktail, right? We just save time to fill up the list with other stuff. So
I hate how bad you're making me feel right now. Like, this is totally, you've just literally described the last 4 months of my life. It's horrible.
Okay, well, you need to read a book called 4,000 Weeks, okay? And it's called 4,000 Weeks, and it's brilliant. I'd say everybody needs to read it because it gives you a very big perspective on how flawed we are as humans at actually being able to give ourselves rest.
That sounds like that's the amount of weeks I have in my life, and I've already wasted 2,000 of them.
Yeah. So the idea of saving time, I think, is interesting because that's how people are pitching it to teachers. It's like, oh, you're going to get all this time. I think what's more exciting is that it's another enabler to redistribute your energy, right? So if we go back to this mind-heart, kind of idea, is that as a teacher, as an educator, you are way more than somebody who just dispels information into the students. You're, especially depending on the age group, you are sometimes their pseudo parent. You're their caregiver. You watch over their medical situation. You listen to them when they're, you're empathetically understanding where that kid's at. You're checking in with them. You're playing a role that is so much greater than someone marking work, checking rubrics and whatever, right? So what I'm hoping AI does, which I've hoped a lot of these tools have done, but then we had like this, I remember even when I was teaching, smartboards came out just as I started teaching. So I started in the classroom in 2007. So that was when smartboards were like, woohoo! And for me, that saved me time because I used it so integratedly that it was brilliant. I mean, I would just have ideas for my classes, throw them into PowerPoints and then have them ready to go. I didn't have to worksheets. I wasn't using the printer. I completely embraced that to the nth degree, right? But then with that rise of ed tech, there seemed to be a lot of people selling into us, a lot of apps, a lot of this, a lot of hoo-ha. And sometimes that hoo-ha was just a time waster, right? Because, the system wasn't quite tailored. So educators have to be very careful as to what they actually choose to use because there's everybody trying to solve every problem for them. So just use the ones that help you get the best and so that you can rechannel that energy to the human parts of teaching. And that's where I see the exciting part of AI. And so if I take an example of the classroom, that's fairly easy for us to all think about. It's like, okay, well, if I'm not having to spend hours and hours doing these mundane tasks at night, I can be better planning for personalized learning, or I can be paying more attention to the students' social interactions. Maybe I can redistribute that energy to listen to kids more, read more, or whatever, right? In the learning design space, it's about helping them consolidate, right? Get from, this is my concept here, I need to get it down to here. And that's how I use ChatGPT at the moment. I go, okay, I've got this like 3-paragraph thing. Can you just rewrite it for me? And I'll ask it to rewrite it and I'll say, make it shorter, right? And it's helping distill key information. You still have to read it. You still have to edit it. It's never going to come back how you want it, right? But there's these small things that could be done. So back to my example of this brilliant team we worked with, they just had so much content.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Right? So much content.
Please summarize.
Exactly. And I was running all of their content through Grammarly, right? So we were already using an AI tool on it, but it wasn't, Grammarly's great, but it doesn't do what So what I do now is I put it through Grammarly, then I put it into ChatGPT and I say, okay, get me the key points.
Right. Summarize or create an outline or create bullet points.
Right. So that act can really save everybody time. I mean, that is, and also it gets a common voice, right? Grammarly helps with that as well, common voice, because we had three different people inside this course. So my job as a learning designer in that instance is to get a common thread of terminology. So because you can put parameters into ChatGPT, you can say, use, and also grammar as well. So obviously American and Australian, we use S's, you guys use Z's, all that kind of stuff. So you can say, I make sure you've always got an S, make sure you use this term always for the learners, right? So you can just get it to do these. They're not huge things, but they do save you time so that you can focus more on the cool stuff. And the cool stuff is, okay, well, here's the information. How do I then get this information into some active learning opportunity? Or how can I extend the learners on this? Now, the AI is not doing that for you. You've got to do that. But the AI did that part and got you in a position where you got a chance to say, right, so is this relevant? Yes, it's relevant. So how else can I make sure the learners have got it? Okay, I'm going to do a short two-question quiz, true, false. Right, I'm going to put that in there, right? That's where you can get your time back in a learning design perspective.
Nice. I love that you're saying you've already using this in your practice and those kinds of things. Do you find that as you're pulling this out with clients, is it still like, oh my gosh, is it still like magic, or are you getting pushback? It's like, oh, I don't think that's ethical. Is this original? Are we going to get like, I guess I'm looking for the challenges that you're seeing with that, or are you still kind of, hey, look, the wizard's behind the curtain, and you kind of show, and hey, let's try this, and we'll design from there?
Well, to be honest, they don't really know how we get to what we give back to them. So it's not really like I have to say, oh, I'd use the chatbot to do this. I mean, if they ask me, I'd say, yeah, I got the chat. So sometimes I've gone, I'll just get the chatbot to rewrite my learning outcomes to check just what they think, and then I'll cross check, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they'll come up with a better adjective, and I'm like,
oh yeah,
I'm like, go, I'll use that one, right? So that process doesn't. I mean, that's just me, but I'm still doing the discernment. So this is the thing about educators that I've always been, I guess, hoping that they understand is there's so much that we do that is invisible, that's part of our, somehow in our DNA. So most people who are teachers say, I always knew I was going to be a teacher. Very rarely do you feel, maybe 20-30% of teachers are teachers because, hey, it's got stable pay and I decided that was a good idea after I tried this other job that I hated, right? Most teachers go, I was born to be a teacher. It's just part of my thing, right? So we then go through quite comprehensive training, especially in Australia. A K-12 teacher in Australia goes through a minimum of 3 to 4 years, right, of training. So in higher education, they don't have to have any training in education in Australia. So they can teach in universities.
But okay,
They can teach in universities without a degree in education in Australia, right? So we have this really highly trained, and when I say highly trained, that doesn't mean that they can just walk into that other situation and be really good at their job. What I mean is highly trained in education. So there are so many things that sit behind the decision that an educator is making. And this is why I like to caution people not to freak out in education. I think AI is going to be super fun for us. But because if we still remember where our value is, and our value is in all the things that we know and all the experiences we've had, and how we take the mind and turn it into the heart and blend those two together. It's not going to be, and also how we see. So one of the things that used to break my heart when I was a school teacher was how little of an opportunity I got to do one-on-one reading with my kids. So I used to teach in middle school, and I was always teaching the lower English classes. I was always the English second language teacher. And so I had the kids that were struggling, right? The literacy ones, the ones that had gotten to year 8 and still really couldn't read, right? They were my kids. So it used to break my heart how little time I got to sit one-on-one with them and listen to them. Because when you listen to a kid read, that's when you can really see where they're at, so where you can focus on, and they get confidence, and they get that support, they get that one-on-one tuition. I was thinking the other day, how cool would it be if you had this like little AI robot, right, who sat there and just for 15, 20 minutes a day, listen to every kid read out loud, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's not a human. It's not the same as me. I get it, right? But that kid would be getting immediate feedback, right? Whereas I could listen to those kids read individually and give immediate feedback once every 4 weeks, 5 weeks.
Right. Exactly. Sure. Right? Yeah.
So how cool is that? Like we could actually bridge this literacy gap that we've created, right? Using a tool. Like imagine, I was even just imagining it looking like I love cats. I'm like, imagine this little AI cat that sits on the table, especially for little kids, right? And they say hi, they say good morning to the cat, and the cat says good morning to them, and they sit down, they read, and the cat at the end of it says, I really like how you used expression on this sentence, and it was so cool to hear that you use that, you listened to that comma was part of your reading out loud, and I saw that you stumbled on this word, but it was really great that you just reread the sentence. Imagine that. How cool is that? Right? That's not taking away from me as a teacher. That's adding to this kid, because this kid wouldn't have got that feedback maybe twice a term.
Right. Amazing.
Right? So this is where I'm like, look, there's a whole bunch of scary things about AI in general, about humanity, but let's not go there. That's a whole other podcast. As educators, we've seen heaps of technology come in and change the game for us. And this one is one of the big ones. And it's already been sitting there under the surface, but it's awesome. And what we need to do, and I read this quote last night, actually, the best way to prepare students for the future is to empower them in the present, right? That is our job. The present is now we're not going to be able to.
So that was like the most perfect tee up for my last question for you, which is, we need to let's talk about flipping the table, because we are all armed with the same technology now.
Yeah.
So designing the learning, hey, that's great. We can be more efficient. We can have our AI cat, which my kids would love. But my kids also now have the access to those tools as well, to write essays, to put resumes together, to do translation of, languages, to do, all these kinds of things. Right. And so how should we think about how we are assessing progress, assessing growth, assessing competency, etc., in this age of AI?
Yeah, and that is the one big red flag I have, because I really believe, I don't know how much you follow of Jordan Peterson's work, but he speaks a lot about writing is thinking formalized, right? So he talks a lot about the connection between gathering your thoughts and being able to think clearly and the way that writing is an enabler of that. So everybody knows if they're really, really emotional and they're in that red zone, they can't write because the thoughts are right. Or if they do write, they journal and it's just scribble. It's just like it's like a mind kind of vomit, right? It's like bleh. That's because it's a reflection of the thinking, right? So what I'm a little scared about is if we outsource a lot of the writing, right, to these in a lot of the structuring and all those things I just spoke about that are also good for some people like me who have got to work under tight deadlines and schedules and whatever. But I already know how to write. Sure. So I don't need to learn how to write. I can use the tool to just make me quicker at my job. I worry about the kids who don't know how to write yet, who are going to try and lean on the chatbots, right? Because we need to still teach them how to think, and we need to teach them how to think through getting them how to write. And so that is our biggest challenge, is to the ones who haven't got that skill yet, to try and steer them away from defaulting into that system. They need to still go through the art of learning how to articulate themselves. They need to be able to sit down and say, I've got some stuff to say and I'm going to structure it in this way, right? Because that is their thinking. And if we don't have people that can think well, they can't make good decisions in the world, right? They're not discerning, they're not critically analyzing, critical thinking, blah, 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 right? So that is our biggest challenge, is that this tool is providing a nice, easy way to get out of that sticky process. And that's the bit that you talked about when you're like, the human part. You sit down and you've got to have no distractions when you write. You've got to sit down and you've got to gather yourself and you've got to go, right, what am I trying to achieve? And then you've got to talk yourself through a process. And then you've got to write a paragraph and go, nah, doesn't work. You're going to make a change. And you make a change. And you make a change. Right? That is the process that AI should not be taking away from students. Never, under any circumstance. Everybody needs to feel the pain of having to communicate something to somebody else and get their thoughts clear. So that's the only part that I'm the most scared about, is that I don't think we need any people that are less skilled in thinking right now and writing. We need more people that are skilled in thinking and writing. So let's not have the bot take over that part.
Fantastic. So let's wrap it up here and tie it in a nice bow. As someone who is a huge believer in this and excited about it, you literally said AI, makes things, it's a fun tool. This is something that makes, designing learning fun. It can make learning fun, all of these things. What are you most excited about over the next 12 to 18 months in terms of how things are going to change? Any tool that you're particularly enamored with? Obviously, you mentioned Grammarly earlier. And let me just leave it there. Like, if you think about, wow, holy smokes, when 2025 is starting, I expect this.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'm expecting a lot more consolidation of the ways in which we're going to use it. So I feel like everybody's sitting there going, how can I use AI? Right? And not let the tool kind of find its way into the sections it needs to find its way into, if that makes sense. So, it's a bit like when VR kind of got really popular. People are like, we need to use VR. Well, yes,
the hammer.
For the right things, right? We'd like if you just do a VR that could have just been a video, like there's no value here, right? So I love when tech starts up because everyone's like super excited, scared, afraid. There's lots of rhetoric. Everyone's wow, and then we suddenly have like this peaceful moment where it's like, oh, actually, all those things we were worried about didn't do. It's actually a little bit crap in this area, so we're just going to ditch it. And there's like a consolidation of the tech. So I guess I'm just riding that wave a little bit and going, let's look at it all. Let's let everybody put out any app they've considered that could be an AI app, but just go for it. Just make it all. Let me try it. And we'll all land on the one or two that helps our life, right? Sure. Because we're already so full of apps and tech and SaaS products and so we're only ever going to be able to use a certain amount per day. And so I'm excited to see sort of what falls down. And also, I think there's a lot of people sitting there, at their desk that have been brewing something that we haven't even seen yet. So I'm kind of excited by those people because they're sitting around going, watching all you guys throw all your stuff out there. But hey, this is a game changer. So I'm kind of, I haven't gone, I thought Grammarly was quite a game changer when it came to that tool. But I actually resisted that for a long time too, by the way. I was like, no, I do it myself. I was very much, no, that's my job to write well. So I'm going to do that.
Yeah, I totally.
I got defensive with it. I'm like, but then once I started using it, I'm like, oh no, this is great. So again, I think that's where we're going to find everybody will just kind of finally find their edge. They'll have a go at something. They'll integrate it into their life and they'll go, it's okay. It's not so scary.
So on that note, again, you don't even know it, but you're almost like this prescient, like truth sayer and teeing me up of what I need to talk about next. But first, let me thank you, Bianca Raby.
Yes,
you're the CEO of Oppida.
Yes.
And before I actually segue here, how would you prefer people to get a hold of you? Like, how should people reach out to talk to you about learning experience other than buying your book, obviously?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can just jump on the website. We have a community as well. So we have a online Oppida Learning where we have some free courses, some paid courses, but you get access to our free learning design community. So it's the best way to interact with us. There's about 600 people in there at the moment, so join them. We have lots of, and anytime we publish anything, any courses that we're publishing, we throw into there. So, you get access to anything that we're doing around the learning design space. So that's the best way to engage with us as a company. I have a YouTube channel as well. So if you're a teacher, go onto there, just type in Bianca Raby. I'm the only one, so you'll find me. And other than that, you can just throw us an email to the hello@oppida.co if you've got something specific to talk about that you think a call will be needed. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
I'm all over the webs.
Taking time out of your morning. I've really enjoyed watching the sunrise behind you.
Now you're seeing.
I think you're going to have a beautiful day there in Bali.
Yeah, it looks lovely.
Thanks so much for taking the time now to speak with me today.
Thank you, Ladek. Cheers.
Thank you again for listening to the eLearn podcast here from OpenLMS. I just wanted to ask one more time, if you enjoyed this show, if you learned something, if you were inspired, if you were challenged, if you feel like, this is something you can take into your practice, please do me a favor. And right now on your podcast player, hit subscribe. That way you're never going to miss a future episode. Also, come over to elearnmagazine.com and subscribe there as well, because we have tons of great information about how to create killer online learning outcomes. Thanks.